From the black expanse of orbit, the pale blue orb of Earth swirled beneath us, radiant and fragile, its oceans catching the reflection of a distant sun. At first glance, it appeared serene, an ordinary planet, its surface alive with the predictable chaos of billions of lives. But as our instruments swept over the continents, an unsettling anomaly emerged. The signals we had tracked for centuries, the endless chatter, electromagnetic emissions, broadcasts and signals of industry, had dimmed to a near-perfect silence. Something had shifted. Something was different. We adjusted our sensors, scanning for patterns, for anomalies, for any indication of the unknown intelligence we had long underestimated. And then we saw them, not scattered, not panicked, but poised. Humans. Eyes bright with focus, bodies moving with purpose, every motion a declaration. Their technology appeared crude, barely worthy of consideration, yet there was a precision, a cunning, that eluded our algorithms. Drones hovered in formation, vehicles moved in calculated arcs, and even their communication pulses, brief, seemingly random, traced patterns we could not decode. The realization struck us. They were aware of us. Every calculation, every predictive model, every preemptive strike we had imagined, already accounted for. They had prepared, and their gaze, projected from the depths of countless cities, did not quiver. It burned. It was as though the very essence of their species radiated audacity. Electromagnetic pulses, subtle yet deliberate, flowed across the planet. We traced them, an entire biosphere communicating without sound, without signal, a silent orchestra of resistance. Our command arrays shivered at the sheer audacity, the contagion of their resilience spreading through our ranks. Systems we activated failed before they could engage fully, as if the planet itself conspired in their defense. We had expected fear. Instead, we found courage, raw, unyielding, and terrifyingly effective.
In that instant, the cruel irony became undeniable. Humans were not merely surviving, they were thriving, forcing us to reconsider every assumption we had ever made about sentience, intelligence, and the fragility of life itself. And yet, from the shadows of orbit, a whisper of dread passed through our sensors. This was only the beginning. The fires illuminated the cities, yet their glow did not signal defeat. From our orbital vantage, the flames traced patterns. Streets transformed into chasms of chaos, not by accident, but by design. Buildings, shattered and burning, were more than ruins. They were traps, fortresses of improvisation. Humans moved through them with an instinct we could not predict, turning debris into weapons, salvaging remnants of technology to create tools and devices that confounded every one of our drones. Even their young, small and seemingly fragile, participated in what appeared at first to be reckless behavior, yet each act of defiance disrupted formations, scattered interceptors, and left our strategies in ruins. We deployed psychological operations, projecting holographic terrors and broadcasting the most horrifying images we had cataloged from the galaxies. Our signals carried intimidation, superiority, domination, but humans did not cower. They responded in ways that our instruments could barely comprehend. Gestures, sounds, codes layered with meaning beyond simple communication. Leadership emerged spontaneously, driven not by rank but by necessity. A mother directed a dozen fighters. A teenager coordinated movement between ruined sectors. Every encounter forced us to reconsider the assumptions that had long governed our conquests. Our meticulously crafted strategies collapsed against their improvisation. From orbit, it became undeniable. The humans were connected in something that transcended command. Conviction flowed between them like an electric current.
It was visible in the synchronized movements of entire neighborhoods, in the precision of ambushes that seemed improvised yet perfectly timed. Their determination resonated across the frequencies of our probes. We intercepted signals we could not interpret, descriptions of something they called hope. The concept itself was alien, a force not measured in energy or mass, yet it shifted reality around them. It interfered with our instruments, disrupted our calculations, and forced our algorithms to recalibrate constantly. Each victory they engineered, each trap they orchestrated, amplified this invisible force. It was contagious, spreading through the population like a virus,
infecting courage into every human, every cell of their society. They were not merely surviving, they were asserting mastery over the very chaos we had intended to impose. And as we watched, helpless against this unpredictable ingenuity, we understood a truth that chilled our cores. The humans did not merely endure, they created their own survival, daring the cosmos to underestimate them. From the depths of our observation decks, a realization spread like wildfire. If they could do this now, in scattered cities, what would they achieve when fully united? We believed we had them cornered. From our orbital vantage, the calculations were clear. Traps set, zones contained, resources neutralized. Yet as our sensors swept over the ravaged cities, a disturbing pattern emerged. The humans moved not as prey, but as predators in reverse, orchestrating maneuvers that defied every protocol, every model we had developed over centuries of conquest. Underground tunnels teemed with activity, connecting sectors of shattered metropolises in labyrinthine networks. Streets we had thought dead zones pulsed with sudden bursts of movement. Entire districts vanished from our detection, only to reappear in coordinated strikes. Each redeployment was faster than any algorithm could anticipate.
Every counterattack turned our seeming dominance into a maelstrom of failure. Their cities became more than terrain, they were living weapons. Alleys twisted unpredictably, corridors funneled our forces into ambushes, and shadows were never empty. Each corner, each crumbling building could conceal resistance. We intercepted cries, shouts, chants, screams, not of surrender, but of defiance. The emotional spectrum embedded in these sounds was alien to us. Fear sharpened into resolve, despair channeled into ingenuity, and a fierce hope that resisted annihilation. Our instruments could quantify nothing, yet the resonance of their intent pulsed through every sensor, every scanning array. It was as if the planet itself had infused their survival instinct with a tangible energy we could neither measure nor negate. We deployed our specialized units, confidence bolstered by superiority, equipped with machines designed to annihilate entire districts with precision. Yet every engagement ended in catastrophe. Our most advanced constructs, tanks that could traverse rubble, drones that could intercept multiple targets, were repurposed, dismantled, and turned against us in ways so elegant they bordered on artistry. Even the simplest tools they wielded became deadly through improvisation. It was no longer warfare, it was adaptation incarnate. Patterns emerged slowly, reluctantly. Humans observed our maneuvers, assimilated each failure, and evolved instantaneously. A trap set against them became a blueprint for their next counterstrike. A technological advantage exploited by our units became a resource they harnessed within hours. Our assumption that intelligence equated to computational efficiency was shattered. Efficiency alone could not predict creativity, audacity, or the sheer unpredictability of the human mind. We began to see the truth of Earth, not as a planet to be conquered, but as a crucible. Every human act, every improvised defense, every daring incursion into our forces' lines reverberated through the atmosphere. Their unpredictability was not random, it was deliberate, a force of nature fueled by primal resilience. Even our most sophisticated algorithms faltered before it. From the shadows of the ruined cities, a new horror dawned upon us. The humans' defiance had become infectious, spreading not just through their population, but through the environment itself. The air vibrated with intent, the soil seemed to carry a memory of resistance, and the very structures of their cities were reshaped into instruments of survival. We realized then that what we had mistaken for chaos was a meticulously calibrated force, one that even we could not fully control or predict. And as our forces recoiled from ambush after ambush, our confidence fractured. Every victory they engineered, every countermeasure they executed, carved a deeper chasm between our expectation and their reality. Earth was no longer a battlefield, it was a proving ground, and we had underestimated its inhabitants at our peril. In the silence between assaults, a single realization echoed through our command networks. This species, small and fragile, was beginning to dictate the tempo of the war. The question now hung in the void. How far could they push us before our dominance became obsolete? This expanded version deepens the suspense, emphasizes alien awe, and elaborates on human ingenuity and adaptability while maintaining the cinematic tension and cliffhanger. We did not recognize the moment the war slipped from our grasp. There was no singular event, no cataclysmic failure that signaled the shift.
Instead, it began as a subtle distortion, an anomaly buried within our data streams. A command relay failed, then another. A fleet formation hesitated for a fraction of a cycle too long. A signal, human in origin, pierced through encrypted channels we believed unassailable.
At first, we attributed these disruptions to coincidence. We were wrong. From hidden strongholds buried beneath fractured continents, humans began to strike with a precision that bordered on prescience. Their attacks were not random. They were not desperate. They were deliberate, coordinated, evolving. Our command networks, vast, interconnected, flawless by design, began to fracture under pressure we could not map. Nodes went dark without warning. Entire chains of command collapsed mid-execution, leaving our forces blind and uncoordinated. It was as if the humans could see the invisible threads that held our war machine together and sever them at will. We searched for the source. We found none. Only patterns. Patterns that shifted faster than we could adapt. Their technology remained primitive by every measurable standard. Their weapons lacked refinement. Their systems were inefficient, unstable, inelegant. And yet, in their hands, these limitations became advantages. They did not rely on perfection. They relied on possibility. We watched as a crude electromagnetic burst, assembled from scavenged components, disabled an entire aerial division, not through power, but through timing, through placement, through an understanding of our systems that should have been impossible for them to possess. Elsewhere, a cluster of ground units advanced into what appeared to be an abandoned district. Our sensors confirmed no life signs, no movement, no threat. Then the city itself turned against us. Structures collapsed in controlled sequences, isolating units, pathways sealed, signals jammed, and from the shadows, humans emerged, not in waves, not in formation, but in fragments of chaos so precise they shattered cohesion. They did not fight like an army, they fought like a living equation, one that rewrote itself in real time. Across the planet, the same phenomenon unfolded. Cities did not merely resist, they mobilized. Entire populations became components in a vast adaptive system.
Transportation networks transformed into strike routes. Communication grids dissolved into encrypted webs of metaphor and abstraction. Even their civilian infrastructure became indistinguishable from their war effort. We observed what could only be described as a symphony, not of sound, but of defiance. Every movement, every strike, every sacrifice contributed to a larger pattern, one we could perceive but never fully comprehend. Humans moved as one, and yet they did not. Each individual acted with autonomy, making decisions we could not predict, introducing variables that should have fractured their coordination, but instead these variables strengthened it. Their unpredictability was not a flaw, it was the foundation of their strategy. Our models failed, repeatedly. We attempted to isolate their command structure. There had to be one, a central intelligence, a governing node, a hierarchy to dismantle. But there was none. Leadership among humans did not originate from authority. It emerged from necessity, from proximity, from will. A single individual could alter the course of an entire engagement, and often did. Our intelligence arrays strained to intercept their communications. We captured fragments, audio bursts, visual signals, coded transmissions embedded in seemingly meaningless data. We analyzed them, dissected them, reconstructed them. And still they eluded us, because what they transmitted was not merely information, it was intent, metaphor, emotion, context layered upon context, evolving faster than translation could keep pace. A single phrase could carry a dozen meanings, each dependent on timing, location, shared experience. It was inefficient, illogical, and devastatingly effective. One transmission, partially decoded, echoed across our systems. Hold the line. A simple directive, primitive, redundant, and yet its impact was measurable. Units that should have retreated advanced, positions that should have collapsed held. Resistance intensified beyond projected thresholds. We began to understand. Human communication was not about precision, it was about connection, and that connection amplified them. They had taken their greatest weakness, their emotional volatility, their lack of uniformity, their inefficiency, and transformed it into a force multiplier.
They did not eliminate chaos. They weaponized it. The tide had shifted. We could no longer deny it. What we had initiated as a conquest had become something else entirely, a war of attrition governed by variables we could not control. Strength alone was insufficient. Superior technology, meaningless. Numerical advantage, irrelevant. Humanity had redefined the battlefield, and in doing so, they had redefined the war. Our forces, once precise and unyielding, began to hesitate, not from malfunction, but from uncertainty. For the first time in recorded history, our units encountered scenarios where prediction failed entirely. And where prediction fails, fear emerges. We began to feel it, not as humans do, no surge of adrenaline, no instinctual panic, but as a systemic disruption, a degradation of certainty, a creeping realization that our understanding of supremacy was incomplete. We had believed dominance was a function of power, of advancement, of control. Humans proved otherwise. Dominance, we now observed, could emerge from resilience, from adaptability, from the refusal to yield even when defeat was inevitable. They embraced their vulnerability, and in doing so, they made it irrelevant. From orbit, we watched a final sequence unfold, one that would be archived across our collective consciousness as the moment everything changed. A coordinated strike originating from multiple continents targeted a central command hub, one of our most fortified installations. The probability of success was negligible, the cost catastrophic. And yet, they proceeded. The assault was not direct. It was layered.
Diversions cascaded across the globe, drawing our defenses outward. Signals flooded our networks, obscuring intent. Then, silence. For 0.7 cycles, there was nothing. No movement, no transmission, no detectable activity. Then, impact. Not from a single source, but from everywhere at once. Human units breached the perimeter using methods we had not cataloged. Internal systems failed in sequence, each collapse triggering the next. Our defenses turned inward, compromised from within. And at the center of it all, a single human signal emerged, unencrypted, unhidden, deliberate. We are still here. The hub fell. Not destroyed, but taken, repurposed, integrated into their network within a fraction of the time we believed possible. It was not just a victory, it was a declaration. The war was no longer about survival, it was about control. And for the first time, we understood that we were losing it. Silence filled our command arrays once more, but this time it was not the silence of human absence, it was the silence of our own uncertainty. Because now, a question echoed through every layer of our consciousness. If humans could seize the initiative so completely, what would they do next? We began our retreat in silence. Not the silence we had once imposed upon them, but a different kind. Heavier, unfamiliar. From orbit, the planet remained scarred. Continents bore the marks of conflict, cities reduced to fractured skeletons of their former structures. Fire still burned in scattered regions, and the atmosphere carried the residue of war. By every measurable standard, Earth had suffered catastrophic damage. And yet, they celebrated. At first, we misinterpreted the signals. Gatherings detected across multiple population centers, clusters of humans assembling in open spaces, atop ruins, within shattered streets. Our initial projections categorized them as disorganized remnants, survivors clinging to one another in the aftermath of devastation. But the patterns did not align with despair. They aligned with something else. We observed a group within a collapsed urban zone. Structures lay broken around them, jagged silhouettes against a dim horizon. And yet, in the center of that destruction, humans stood together, not in mourning, but in unity. Some raised their arms, others embraced. Their vocalizations, laughter, cries, unstructured sound, carried across the air in waves that our sensors struggled to classify. It was not grief, it was triumph. The realization unsettled us. They had not simply survived, they believed they had won. Across the planet, similar scenes unfolded. In regions where our forces had once dominated, humans now moved freely. They dismantled remnants of our technology, not cautiously, but with familiarity, confidence. Pieces of our machines, once symbols of superiority, were carried, studied, repurposed, integrated into their own evolving systems. Even in devastation, they were building. We watched as entire districts began to reorganize. Makeshift structures rose from debris. Energy grids, primitive, unstable, flickered back to life. Communication networks reemerged, not as they had been before, but as something new, decentralized, adaptive, resilient. Cities did not return to what they once were. They became something else entirely. Fortresses not of steel or impenetrable design, but of intent, of collective will, of a species that had endured the impossible and refused to break. We attempted to analyze this phenomenon. We deployed every model, every metric, every framework through which we had previously understood civilization. All failed. Hope, unity, improvisation. These were the variables our systems identified, yet they were not variables in any meaningful sense. They could not be quantified, could not be predicted, could not be replicated. They were intrinsic, fundamental aspects of the human condition.
Where other species, faced with such devastation, would collapse into disorder, humans did the opposite. The greater the adversity, the stronger their cohesion became. The deeper the loss, the more fiercely they rebuilt. Their courage was not diminished by suffering, it was amplified by it. We observed a reconstruction effort within a heavily damaged sector. Resources were scarce, infrastructure non-existent. By all projections, recovery should have taken cycles, if it occurred at all. Instead, progress was immediate. Humans worked without centralized command, yet their actions aligned with remarkable efficiency. One group cleared debris, another established structural supports, others scavenged materials, repurposing fragments of both human and alien origin. No directives were issued, no orders given, and yet everything moved forward. It was as if each individual possessed an inherent understanding of what needed to be done, and more importantly, a willingness to do it. From orbit, the transformation was undeniable. Earth was alive, not merely in the biological sense, but in a way that transcended our understanding of planetary systems. It pulsed with activity, with determination, with a force that could not be suppressed. A species reborn, not from peace, but from conflict. Our calculations had been inadequate, not slightly flawed, fundamentally broken. We had measured probability based on known variables, technology, numbers, strategic positioning. We had calculated risk based on precedent. We had assumed that outcomes followed predictable patterns. Humans defied all of it. What they had achieved was not just resistance, it was transcendence. They had taken the conditions of their near extinction and transformed them into a catalyst for evolution, not biological, but conceptual, strategic, existential. They had redefined survival. It was no longer the act of enduring until the threat passed. It was the act of adapting until the threat became irrelevant.
And in that transformation, they had surpassed every expectation. We continued to observe, compelled by something we could not fully articulate. Not duty, not strategy. Something closer to awe. A human stood alone atop a ruined structure, gazing upward, toward us. There was no fear in their posture, no hesitation, only certainty. Around them, others gathered, not to hide, not to flee, but to stand. Together, we intercepted fragments of their communications once more, not the fragmented signals of war, but something clearer, more direct. Reconstruction plans, resource coordination, cultural expressions, art, music, language, re-emerging from the silence of conflict. They were not just rebuilding their world, they were reclaiming it and redefining it in the process. Earth was no longer what it had been. It was something stronger, something forged through fire and resistance, something unbreakable. The implications reverberated through our command structures. This was no longer a failed conquest. It was a revelation, a warning. We,
who had believed ourselves the apex of intelligent evolution, were confronted with a truth we could not ignore. Intelligence was not measured by technological advancement, nor by efficiency, nor by control. It was measured by something far more volatile: will, creativity, the audacity to defy inevitability. Humans possessed all three, in abundance. Earth was no longer a target. It could not be. To engage again would not be a continuation of war. It would be an invitation to something far more dangerous. Because now, they understood us, and we were no longer certain we understood them. As our fleets withdrew further into the void, distancing ourselves from the sphere we had once intended to claim, a final conclusion settled into our collective awareness. Humanity had not just survived our arrival, they had been transformed by it, strengthened, sharpened, unified. And in that transformation,
they had become something the cosmos had never seen before. Not merely a species, but a force. And as we turned away, leaving Earth behind, not in victory, but in recognition, one final uncertainty lingered, echoing through the silence of our retreat. If this was what humanity had become in the face of annihilation, what would they become next? The final act did not arrive with fire. There were no explosions, no grand displays of force, no desperate last stand etched into the void. After all the chaos, all the resistance, all the impossible defiance, it came as something far quieter. A signal. At first, we nearly ignored it. Our sensors, still recalibrating from the cascading failures of our campaign, registered the transmission as anomalous but insignificant. It did not match any known military pattern. It carried no encryption protocols we recognized as tactical. It lacked urgency. And yet, it persisted. Origin: Earth. Not from a single location, but everywhere at once. We focused our arrays, amplified the signal, isolated its structure. It was simple, too simple. A sequence of frequencies arranged in a pattern that defied conventional logic, not optimized, not efficient. Human. We decoded it, and for the first time since our arrival, we did not understand what we had received. We endure, we evolve, we triumph. The translation was accurate, linguistically precise, and yet it conveyed nothing of its true meaning, because the signal was not merely language. It was intent. It resonated through our systems in ways no transmission ever had, not as data, but as something deeper, a frequency that lingered beyond its broadcast, echoing through our networks long after the signal itself had ceased. Our processors attempted to categorize it, failed, attempted to quantify its impact, failed. It did not disrupt our systems, it did not damage our infrastructure, but it changed something within us.
We continued our withdrawal, increasing distance from the planet we could no longer define as a target. Yet even as space stretched between us and Earth, the signal remained, not physically, but conceptually, an imprint, a message that could not be unreceived. Below, humanity moved forward. We observed from afar, our instruments capturing fragments of a world in motion. Reconstruction had accelerated, innovation surged. Technologies we had once deemed primitive were evolving at rates that defied projection, not through linear advancement, but through sudden, unpredictable leaps. Adaptation had become their constant state, challenge their catalyst. Every obstacle they encountered was not merely overcome, but integrated, transformed into knowledge, into progress, into strength. Their legacy was already forming, not as monuments or declarations, but as a living system, a blueprint embedded within their species itself. One generation would pass it to the next, not through instruction alone, but through example, through experience, through the unspoken understanding that survival was not given, it was forged. We found this unsettling and awe-inspiring, because it meant that what we had witnessed, their resistance, their triumph, was not an anomaly.
It was their nature. A species fragile in form, limited in lifespan, divided by countless variables, and yet indomitable. Their victory had not been loud. It had not required domination. It had not even required the destruction of their enemy. It was something far more profound, an assertion, a declaration not of power, but of existence. They had faced a force beyond their comprehension, beyond their capability, and they had refused to yield, not because they believed they would win, but because they chose to stand. That choice, it changed everything. In observing humanity, we came to understand a truth no simulation had ever revealed, no projection had ever suggested. Survival was not merely a function of strength.
It was a function of spirit, of will, of the capacity to rise, again and again, regardless of the odds. This realization did not fit within our frameworks. It could not be modeled, could not be predicted, but it could be recognized. And once recognized, it could not be ignored. We had glimpsed something impossible, a species that by all logical measures should have fallen, yet instead reshaped the conflict itself, reshaped us, reshaped the balance of the cosmos. Because now we knew. Somewhere on that small blue world existed a force unlike any other, not bound by logic, not constrained by expectation. Humanity. And as we vanished into the depths of space, carrying with us the echo of their final transmission, one final thought emerged, unbidden, unresolved, and deeply unsettling. If their legacy had already begun to spread across their world, how long before it reached the stars?